A year since the July unrest, and the spotlight is back on the use of social media. Now, during last year's unrest, the hashtag Free Jacob Zuma, hashtag Shutdown KZN, these were online campaigns calling on a national shutdown until former President Jacob Zuma was released from prison. Now, the Institute for Security Studies says there is an emerging threat of digital vigilantism that's taking place in our country. Let's get more now and speak to Lizette Lancaster. She is with the Institute for Security Studies. Lizette, thank you very much for your time. Let me get this question out of the way. Do you think that social media is being used to promote vigilantism in South Africa in some instances?
Yes, thank you. Yes, obviously we are seeing this type of movement, especially from about 2020. And it mirrors very much the type of social media vigilantism that we've seen in America and in other places on the continent, where social media is being used to further people's ambitions and to further their causes, and to use social media to mobilize people on the ground.
How then does law enforcement and perhaps the people who are most appropriate to ask this question of, it's the social media owners, the people who create these platforms, what do they do to curb this cyber security abuse?
We have seen them coming out quite clearly with their own forums on terrorism. So we've seen them forming anti-terrorism forums, making sure that they don't promote terrorism groups or terrorist groups on their platforms. So they've been, Facebook, Twitter and such, very vocal about terrorism organizations. What we haven't seen and what they've been grappling with, as we saw in the case of Donald Trump in America, is how to deal with political or other type of social movements. And it is because the line between political freedom of speech and political activism is very fine when it becomes vigilantism, where people are inciting violence or attacks or furthering problematic causes, propagating hate online. Yeah. It becomes very tricky.
Exactly the point that you're touching on, that social media can often be used as a tool to spread hate speech or to incite violence, which is very much what the authorities were talking about last year during this July unrest, that there were the so-called instigators, and subsequent to that, we have seen people being arrested for fanning the flames of what we saw last year. How then does the law, Lizette, try to curb this without prompting the organizations such as the Freedom of Expression Institute, for example, coming out to say you are infringing on the freedoms of expression?
Yes, it becomes quite tricky. We've seen in other countries where the internet just simply gets shut down, like in China. I think it's happened to Nigeria and others. And of course, that is really problematic in terms of freedom of speech and the constitutional rights that we all have. We've even seen police, top-level police officials stating that, social media should be shut down in places like KwaZulu-Natal. So there is that sort of desperation. But we do have the new Cyber Crimes Act that does make it make people accountable for what they say on social media. Of course, it is very difficult to prove causality, that what you said and the incitement that you perpetrated on social media did lead to actual violence. So that causality still remains problematic, but the law is being strengthened. And I think the key is that we do need more digital literacy training for law enforcement and the public and the prosecuting authorities, because there are ways and means to look at social media in a more critical way.
Yeah.
Of course, the other problem is that some do it under fake accounts. So that digital footprint also needs to be tracked, and that is the type of thing where we need to see greater cybersecurity expertise within law enforcement.
Sure. And I suppose the argument, Lizette, would be that interest in social media campaigns has not subsided. If anything, it's probably grown. And I'm thinking here of campaigns such as Put South Africa First, for example, which some people have interpreted as being, spreading hate speech or xenophobia, because this is now targeted at foreign nationals living in South Africa. Talk to us about whether the arrests that we saw last year of the so-called instigators might lessen the appetite for the abuse of this space.
It is difficult to say. I doubt it, because we haven't really seen consequences for these people's actions. People are out on bail or cases have been withdrawn. What we do see is that communities and movements such as Operation Dudula has become more emboldened since the July violence to take matters in their own hands and not to wait for government to deal with what they term problematic issues such as migration policy and such. So we are seeing this cooperation between social media actors as well as people on the ground. And that's what makes it so scary, because never before, not during the 2008 attacks or even in 2015, when we saw quite a lot of violence perpetrated against foreign-born migrants, had we had such coordinated and orchestrated types of events where social media is working with operations on the ground. And I think that's scary, because I don't think people believe there are consequences to their actions yet.
Well, I suppose one question remains then, the way forward. What do we do in the interim while the law is being strengthened, as you've put it earlier? While the law is being strengthened, what do we do as ordinary citizens to try and counter these narratives?
Yes, social media is a bit of a rabbit hole. Once you start clicking on hashtags such as Put South Africa First and such, you become very prone to landing in an echo chamber where you only see that type of post, whether on Facebook or Twitter. And it becomes this echo chamber of reality. So we must be very careful to not perpetrate the myths that often underlie these negative sentiments, because most of the anti-foreign sentiments are born from myths and beliefs or exaggeration of certain situations. Not all foreigners are criminals. Not all foreigners are taking our jobs. As a matter of fact, these people actually create jobs. So there's a lot of information that's not getting out there. And we land up in these echo chambers where we reinforce one another's false narratives. And I think we need to be much more savvy about social media.
Lizette Lancaster, thank you very much for your insights on this matter. She's from the Institute for Security Studies.